going on, everybody? Thank you so much for being here for this episode. I really do appreciate that you guys are listening and chiming in and on Instagram and stuff when you hear something that you like or intrigues you. I love having conversations with you guys, so feel free to reach out to me anytime. My guest today is my cousin, Connor McClenahan. He's a therapist that specializes in anxiety and depression, which I have had my fair share of growing up. And I wanted to have a chat about religion and faith in the context of those things. And we've had kind of a similar upbringing and similar ways that we were raised in the church. So I thought it'd be really cool to catch up with him and have a chat about those things. Enjoy the chat. Connor.
Hey.
What's up, cuz?
Hey, Eric.
This is fun. How are you, man?
Doing well. Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, this is I'm glad that you reached out and said let's do it in person, because it forced me to do my last podcast with Dave in person so that I didn't look like an idiot when you got here and nothing was set up correctly. It like made me get my button gear and actually like go away from Zoom, because Zoom just became so easy.
It became really normal, really quick in a weird way, and then
fast.
When you do something in person, you're like, oh, this is different.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of things like that. Like I'm addicted to food delivery now.
Oh yeah.
I just things like that out of the pandemic. It's bad.
Or like restaurants that you just go in and it's just literally a line of takeout orders.
Yes.
And you go in and nobody's sitting in the seats.
Yes.
Very odd.
I was at Subway the other day and I'm sitting there waiting and I realized they're making like 15 orders that are going to be picked up before they serve me, the in-person person. It's a little annoying.
Shouldn't there be like priority or something like that?
It's a little annoying.
Yeah.
How are you coming out of pandemic things? Are you feel like you're out of it, or you feel like...
I feel like it went out of it like this fall. It felt like things definitely changed. Like I was down. I kept working. I'm, therapist. I worked downtown through the pandemic. And I remember days when I literally would do this, walk down the middle of Grand Avenue in downtown, which is a huge street, and no cars. Felt like, I'm in the middle of I Am Legend or something like that,
totally.
And so really desolate, kind of depressing, but there's been kind of waves of people coming in and out, and you can kind of see downtown where it's like there's some months where it's like really busy and like people are out, and it just feels so good seeing everyone like connect and stuff. But this fall, it felt really normal, like coming back like September or something like that. It's like the first months where it's really felt like what it used to be, where you just see people out having coffee together and talking, hanging out. And it's a good feeling.
Are you doing therapy online still, or are you in person?
It's about 50-50.
Yeah.
Some people, they've just kind of learned a certain pattern where it's like they're at home now, and so they're not leaving their house much. Yeah. And so they just do virtual sessions. Other people, it's just... I think they'll make the drive in just to come in just because it's maybe one of the only appointments that they have, and it feels good to them to like actually just have to be somewhere, meet in person.
A reason to get up and shower.
Yeah, exactly. And there's I think there's a lot to that about like, I think that's how we get like civilized, honestly, is like we have to have times that we have to be somewhere, or else it's like you said, it's like, why should I shower? Why should I do my, and it changes our impression of ourselves, I think.
Yeah, that social responsibility drives good habits.
Yeah, totally.
Individually.
And then also there's something about when you have to be somewhere, the drive or the time it takes to get you there, it's kind of like washing away whatever you did before. It's like this transitional space that you can kind of enter into. And it's so different than like seeing somebody when they literally log out of their last meeting like 2 seconds before they log on to mine, and they're still getting notifications. And I've had moments where I'm talking with a client and we finally get to a point where they can actually feel something, and then they hear like the little Slack notification, like, and they totally pop out of it. All it took was like this 1 second of the like Slack notification, and then they're like, oh, I'm sorry, what were we talking about? I'm like, do you realize where we were there? Really, really tough, but yeah.
Well, take me on your journey a little bit. You grew up a PK, pastor's kid.
That's right.
where did therapy come into play? When did you start realizing that this is something I want to do?
Yeah.
And when, was ministry ever a thought in that whole process too?
Sure. Yeah. So growing up a pastor's kid, that was kind of my world, was church. That was all of our family friends. Everybody was all in this kind of tight network of people. And I remember feeling some kind of sense of like, oh, this is a possibility to work in the church. But I was actually a bit more kind of, when I thought about what I wanted to be, I thought more about doing something creative, something entrepreneurial with Brendan, my twin brother.
Yeah.
Where we could, do something creatively, like make videos, or, at one point we wanted to be in a band, all the things that you go through when you're in high school, these kind of fun things that you kind of try on. But I remember kind of being interested in the idea of psychology and therapy. I like the idea of being able to get a degree where I'm learning to think about people and help people. And that was kind of my role in my own family, was kind of, being a bit more of a listener, somebody who could kind of bridge gaps and talk through things. And I remember there was a moment where just, I was in high school in this kind of, that kind of session where they kind of talk to you about what you want to do after you graduate. Yeah. I remember just going around, and the other people in front of me were like, you're like, oh, what would you like to do? And the other person was like, oh, psychology. I was like, what would you like to do? Psychology. And then she went around me, and I was like, psychology? Sure, that sounds good. That sounds fine,
Groupthink. Perfect.
Exactly, I know. But it's so funny how you end up where you are, that was kind of part of the start, and it felt so arbitrary. But I talked to my other friend, Calvin, and he was saying, it feels funny. Like when you think about your career, sometimes it feels kind of like, getting like dating a girl, where you kind of try it on and you don't quite know yet. And it just kind of starts to feel right the farther you go into it.
Right.
And I think it was kind of like that for me of going through high school, feeling like, okay, maybe I could do this. Did my undergrad in psychology, and the more and more I studied it, the more it kind of opened up to me. And it felt like it wasn't just about listening to people. It was about understanding neurology and how our minds work, and how they kind of wire and rewire constantly throughout our lives based on our experience. And that's always been fascinating to me, and how our experience of each other remaps our brains in really profound ways. I think that's always been something that's like really interesting to me.
Cool. Yeah. When you start into a business like that, so everything that I do, I suffer from massive like imposter syndrome. Yeah. Like I'm not good enough to do this. No. I can't even think about the responsibility of someone coming to me with those deep of issues, and me being the one that's supposed to help them.
Sure.
How do you know when you're starting out that you're good at it? I would feel the whole time like, am I helping? Am I good at this?
Yeah.
Especially starting out, how did you kind of deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's hard because, especially for therapists, you don't get feedback. Nobody else is watching what you're doing.
Yeah.
And very rarely, right? When you're first starting out, there's some kind of feedback that you get. But it's always been interesting to me how a therapist just sees their clients and nobody knows, just what you do in there.
Like legally, nobody knows.
Yeah. And so it's so weird. It's like I grew up watching my dad preach and seeing him preach, and then people line up after him to give him feedback about how it was affecting them or how he did. Other people can give him feedback, or even for you, doing worship, and leading like an event or something like that. You get a pretty clear sense from people about how it's going.
Kind of.
Really.
Sometimes.
Yeah. And then I guess there's other problems, right? Like people like kind of rose color it for you or something, but.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. But also you can tell when you're up there that a good portion of the people like didn't want to go. So someone made them go, or they had a rough night the night before. There's a lot of things that get in the way of actually getting real feedback.
Sure. Yeah. Maybe that's just
But Grandma always says I do a good job.
Oh yeah. That's all that matters. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it is. I remember feeling that at first though, of feeling really nervous, about, am I doing the right thing or am I helping? we did exercises at the beginning where we had like a two-way mirror kind of thing. And I remember we were kind of doing exercises where we'd kind of do with a classmate, we'd kind of practice some of the techniques of just stopping and listening and reflecting what the person says. As simple as that sounds, how profound it is to talk and have someone literally say your same words back to you. It changes something in you. It helps you slow down. And it makes you realize how seldom we talk like that. We usually kind of are waiting for the other person to kind of, jump in and share their thought or to kind of take the mic from us.
Right.
I remember that being a really helpful thing of kind of learning that way. We also did this thing where, with a classmate, we just are supposed to like sit in silence together. So we just sit and we just maintain eye contact, like gently, whatever. And we just sit for like a minute. And it was one of the most profound experiences I've ever had in my life of, just recognizing another person and slowing down. Yeah. And I remember coming out of it and John, the guy who was with, going, I know Connor better than anybody in the room here, like just because it's just like this kind of profound moment of intimacy.
Let's do that right now.
Yeah.
That'll be good for the podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wherever you are, just look into the person's eyes. But I think things like that were helping. So it wasn't just like, I was thrown in with, with a client in the room at first. It was all these little baby steps that kind of helped you acclimate and kind of get a sense of how to be in the room. But even for sure, I remember seeing my first client and being like, this is heavy. Like they're depending on me and they don't know how little I know or how little I feel confident here. But they kind of, especially in that context, they actually like, their assumption that what you're doing actually really helps, because they're just like, oh, thanks, it really helped. And I'm like, I literally just like sat and told you your words,
That's interesting.
But,
yeah. I definitely I'm always too trustworthy of people in professions.
Yeah.
Like I don't question my auto mechanic. I don't question my doctors. I'm like that. I don't have time to know your job.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. How are you supposed to know?
You touched on it a little bit. Nobody's coming to you to say I had a great day today.
Yeah.
They're coming to you like in their worst moments.
Yeah, sure.
With, really sometimes really dark, heavy things. How do you wade through all that darkness all day and then go home to your wife and kids and lead a normal life?
I think it's difficult. I think therapists especially can fall into this trap where we think what we're supposed to do is help them feel better, And I've had a client before where he's perpetually depressed, and I felt this impulse because like week after week he'd come in and just, and things in his life really were shitty and terrible.
Yeah.
And I couldn't just somehow give him some kind of hope like, oh, it's going to be better. And because there really were things that are just like kind of just, you can't do anything different. This thing is just happening to you and it's not your fault. It's not that you're doing something wrong. There's nothing that is really redemptive about this. It just is pain and it sucks. And sometimes as therapists, especially, I think we can feel some kind of pressure to help them see that things are better. And I think there was a time for that, but there was a lot in me that was resistant to just feeling how sad things were with him. And I think that was leaving him in some kind of loneliness there. And I think we can experience that where it's like what we think is, okay, what I really need is things to be better or to be hopeful. But there's actually a lot of comfort in just having someone be in it with you or feel it alongside of you. It's kind of like if you're in the wilderness, it doesn't help to have someone from a distance going like, hey, it's going to get better. Like sometimes it's like just having someone to be like, hey, this, I can kind of be right next to you here is kind of the healing that we need, because sometimes in life you can't get rid of things. So I think there's been moments like that where I've been challenged to kind of look honestly at how much am I trying to get someone to be hopeful because I can't stand the depressiveness of it. And how much do I need to kind of learn to be comfortable with the pain that somebody brings in and just letting myself not resist it or try hard to change it,
Mm-hmm.
but helping them see that we can kind of survive it together. And I think that's a different kind of resource that we can give people in therapy, especially, is this awareness that we don't have to be happy to be connected to other people. You don't have to be hopeful to be next to me. We can kind of be in I'm okay being in this with you together.
It seems like it would have to be a skill, maybe a learned skill, maybe a natural skill. I don't know. But it seems like it would have to be a skill to be able to sit in those places with somebody. And then when they leave that place yourself.
Yeah.
Is that a hard thing to do to not carry their weight with you the rest of the day?
Yeah. I think it depends on what else is going on for me. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
How much is their pain kind of almost like bouncing off or reflecting off of something in me, like some way that I felt the same way, or something bad that's going on in my life, like pandemic was a lot like that, where people would be like, I don't know when this is going to end. And there's a part of me that goes like, shit, I feel that too,
Totally.
But then there are other things where it doesn't feel as triggering, where even if it's something really dark, I as cold as it sounds, I feel like I can kind of enter into it with them. And then when they're gone, it's not like it's kind of hitting me the same, because it's not something that I generally experience. But I think it is something where there have definitely been times where somebody's sharing something and I go, oh my gosh, or this is something I struggle with too, or excuse me. And those are the times I think it's harder to kind of let it go. And I think in those times, it's like I either need like some kind of place to process it myself. It can be really helpful to talk about it with other therapists. I go to my own therapy. That can be really helpful to just know that I have some places to like kind of talk about those things anyway myself.
Right.
Or doing things that help me kind of remember myself, like cycling. I like to bike a lot, and or just hanging out with my kids who have no idea what I do at work.
Yeah.
That's really helpful to kind of just like, have to come home and they don't know what it means to be a therapist or whatever, and they don't care,
Right.
I just get to kind of almost just shift into a different mode with them.
Right.
Yeah.
Does it affect what you want to consume entertainment wise?
Yeah.
Because I've talked to a lot of therapists or pastors who do counseling that say, I'm already wading through a lot of darkness.
Yeah.
I don't want to watch it in entertainment. I don't want to watch dark cop shows or murder mysteries because I'm dealing with the victims in my office all day. Does that affect you?
Totally. Yeah. Like, Sherry Ann wants to watch The Patient. And I'm like, no way, I can't do it.
Is that the Steve Carell thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Where it's like some psycho, like through, where it's like, oh my God. And there've been
Too
some
real.
experience I've had that just feel kind of like scary like that. And I'm like, I can't, like, I don't want to go back into that. And so, yeah. Definitely. And people even say, they're like, have you seen this movie? It's really psychological. I think you'd like it.
I bet you would love it.
I'm like, no, stop. No. Yeah. The closest thing though, I get to that I really enjoy that is kind of psychological in a different way is like Game of Thrones is like, and it's not because it's directly psychological. It's because like, there's all these like, different perspectives that you're having to hold, and that there's no one hero. And I feel like that's really similar to like a perspective of a psychologist, where it's like, I'm having to see how the different parts of your lives, there's no bad guy, there's just these different competing interests and desires and needs that we have to be able to understand, but that always like intrigued me.
Yeah. I can't pinpoint like the specific movie or the specific time, but I feel like Disney and all of the cartoons we watched as a kid, like, had bad guys.
Yeah.
And now every bad guy has a backstory that kind of like not justifies what they do, but like, even like the newest Grinch movie was like, oh, he was an orphan who didn't get any presents and he hated looking outside the window at everyone celebrating. You know what I mean? Like, every bad guy now has a backstory,
has something you can
goodness.
Understand.
Yeah,
even
totally.
like Phineas and Ferb, like the Doofenshmirtz guy.
Yes,
he's kind of like a likable bad guy. It's weird, but what's your feeling about that?
I think it's just that truth that is anybody inherently fully evil, Or are
What
we
is
all
evil?
the product of, what is evil? Are we just the product of circumstance and,
Yeah.
all those things?
It does kind of beg a question, like, is there a bad guy we can point to?
Right.
You know, like, is there some source to the pain that we experience, or is it all just misunderstanding and disconnection? I kind of go back and forth a bit on that too.
Right.
Like, how much there is something, honestly, that feels comforting when you see, like, for example, Snow White, and here's like the source of all the evil, and then she's done.
Mm-hmm.
She's vanquished, you know, and you have this feeling of like, everything's okay again, you know,
Yeah.
like this person's gone. And I guess there are those moments in those other movies too, like Raya is a really good one.
Yeah.
Where it shows like these different perspectives, or even Moana, where it's like, you know, what is it, Tafiti?
Yeah.
You know, where
they
it's like,
stole her heart.
Yeah,
Not,
exactly.
it's not an evil volcano.
Exactly,
Stole
not
her
evil.
heart. Yeah.
And I don't know. I kind of do think that there is, maybe this is represented in those films, but there is something that is aggressive and competitive and resentful about human nature, that I wonder if it's a little bit washed away in those things. Maybe not, you know. I guess some of those movies do portray it, but I don't know. I feel split about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we certainly rush to demonize people in the culture in that way.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that movies are portraying it that way. Like everyone has a backstory. Everyone has reasons why they act and why they do things and why their brain is formed the way it was formed.
Yeah.
Was there a need, I don't know, therapy lingo, but it seems like anxiety, depression is kind of your specialty. There's so many things that you could
work on,
do as a therapist. How did you narrow in on that specifically?
You know, it was a lot of where I was or where I am, but the fact that I was working in downtown LA, I just, you know, because of our proximity to like lots of law firms, I happen to see a lot of lawyers, CPAs, those kind of people who are just overworked.
Yeah.
Totally, things are just fraying and falling apart. I guess if I look at it that way, I mean, some of the symptoms they experience are anxiety and depression, but really what's going on is that they have this feeling that things aren't okay, and if they work harder and harder, things will be okay again, you know? If they just bend another boundary, if they put in a couple more hours at work, they'll get things done and they'll feel some kind of relief, and it never happens. It never comes, because once they get the project done, they have this sense of guilt, like there's something else coming up, and they're already in this mode of, I can't let something go. I think this is common, not just for, you know, lawyers and, you know, other professionals like that, but I think it is kind of a theme that maybe we all experience to some degree, you know, where we can have some kind of guilt or shame around actually taking a breath in, doing the things that we need to do to take care of ourselves.
Right.
And how deceptive that is, you know, but I think that's a large part of what I find myself working on with people, especially those who are, you know, just in the office in downtown, partially because they're kind of in office mode. A lot of times I see them in the middle of the day, but also just because I think, you know, the more things are expected of you in kind of a higher level of a job or whatever, the more you have this sense that, you know, all I am is kind of a machine. All I am is something to produce something else. It's not a 9-to-5 thing anymore. It's like, you know, this is just who I am. Yeah. And I think people can kind of lose track of themselves and lose track of why they're doing what they do, what's most meaningful to them. And I think the easiest path towards that is just having them recognize their exhaustion, recognize what it feels like to them. The things that don't work are things like, hey, let's set up a schedule and let's make sure you're taking time off. And because they don't listen, even though they think that's what they need. Right. They think, oh, I just need like to be more better about boundaries. That never helps. They go, oh yeah, sure, I'm going to do better this week, you know. Sure. And the next week they come in and like, no, I just had to bend bound, you know, like it doesn't work. And but I think it starts with kind of recognizing their own sense that this isn't okay. And I think a lot of times they don't put weight towards that. They don't really recognize just how much they're losing and how sad they are about it or anxious they are about it.
I've been doing it's a life coaching group that I've been part of for a couple of years now that is mostly creatives and actors, and I could pretty much put exactly what you said into their context also. You know, I'm just a headshot. I'm just my last audition tape. Once I get this role, everything's going to be great. And then you get that role, and then when you're done with that role, you're like, well, what am I now? You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
I feel like you can disagree with this because it's, I don't know this for sure. I just feel this.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like our generation has been kind of the turning point of doing away with the stigma of therapy. Like I even remember being young and hearing like, oh, so-and-so's in therapy. And you're like, oh, they must be really messed up. It doesn't seem to me like there's that stigma anymore. So do you think that we are living in a world with more anxiety now, or that people are just more open to recognizing and talking about it because that stigma isn't quite there as much anymore?
Yeah, I get that flavor a lot from people our age is like an openness about going to therapy, and almost kind of like, oh, why wouldn't you go to therapy or something? You know, like it feels really kind of celebrated as like, you know, really good self-care behavior. And then if people aren't in it, usually they're saying something like, oh, I can't afford it, but nothing like, you know,
there's no stigma.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like there's some stigma, not about therapy, but about mental health diagnoses, you know, so like if you're diagnosed bipolar or, you know, general anxiety disorder or something like that, I feel like that's something that's still a little bit difficult because it can feel like this is an unchangeable kind of, you know, scar on you or something like that you don't want other people to see, which I can totally understand. Yeah. But I think that's a little bit more what I see rather than going to therapy itself.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the discussion just hasn't been had. I agree. Like there are even like comedians and stuff now that are being more open with their diagnosis and,
really?
And stuff like that, openly. And I guess my reaction is I want empathy. I want to lead with empathy. I don't want to judge you. I also have no idea how to interact with you. Maybe we're not educated enough as a society to then be able to handle that diagnosis and kind of know what to do.
Yeah.
You know?
There's a lot of misinformation too. I see all the time now. I don't think this is usually helpful, is like 10 signs that you are depressed, you know, like,
it's like everyone has the 10 signs that they list on those lists.
I know.
Right?
And it's like the new WebMD. Honestly.
It's like going to WebMD and you for sure have cancer. It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah. Are you tired? Do you feel stressed sometimes? You are bipolar.
Do you have a hard time waking up?
Yeah. So bad. It's so bad. And I think it's out of a good place for therapists of going, oh, I want to destigmatize this and whatever. But I think it is just maybe underestimated how anxious people might be about their diagnoses and how quick they're going to be to label themselves to feel some kind of resolution about it. And then they're going to go to their primary care physician and say, hey, I think I'm, you know, bipolar or whatever. And they're going to list the symptoms that they think they have. And, you know, I think that's kind of just not a great recipe for, you know, mental health right there.
So the second part of that question, do you think that we're a more anxious culture than we have been?
Yes. And I think it's not because, I don't know. The reason that I think that is just because of our level of disconnection. I don't think that's just the pandemic. I think the more individualistic we are, the more our minds kind of spin and the less we feel grounded. Okay. And I don't think it's a panacea. I don't think it just gets rid of everything to be in a close community, but I think it's kind of like it helps a lot.
Which is the irony of social media.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Like we're more connected, you know, in social media to people around the world. Yeah. But we feel less connected.
Yeah, I think there's a story to that. The way that I think about it is that throughout the 20th century, we went from people who were primarily, you know, raised in small, closed network communities. Closed network community means that it's a community where everyone kind of knows each other, you know, everyone knows who everyone else is. The idea, like you could picture like, you know, Belle and Beauty and the Beast, where everyone seems to kind of know each other in that town or something. And so our identities are this kind of accumulation of everybody's reflection about who we are. And there's some things that are kind of constraining about that, but there are a lot of things that are really helpful about that. Our brains are actually, and this kind of gets into the neurology of it, but our brains are built, our whole cortex is built around being in a social fabric. So you can see like basically the size of the tribe of a primate has to do with their size of their cortex. So, you know, a chimpanzee has a certain size brain, cortex, which is kind of like the outer shell of the brain. It has to do with all of our planning, our long-term thinking, our awareness of social situations, our visual spatial awareness. All those things are that we have a bigger area in our brain that's devoted, that our brains have grown, and consequentially you can map on a straight line the size of that primate's tribe and the size of its cortex. And that really points to this relationship between our brains are built around our social communities, right? And so you think about over thousands and thousands of years, whatever, our brain has built around a certain kind of community, a certain kind of social environment. And then around the 20th century, that started to degrade, right?
Yeah.
We gained enough technology and resources where we didn't really need each other like that anymore. And so we started having things like, you know, freeways and, you know, closed in yards and individual houses that we aren't living in larger groups. And so this kind of, the size of it should be like 150 people, which is actually interesting because it's actually the size of the average church in America is 150 people. And there's something about that number that fits with us where it feels like, okay, I'm known, I'm seen, whatever. There's something about that. We can get back to that. But that kind of started to degrade over the 20th century. And then I think it kind of creates a vacuum in us where we feel like there's some kind of sense of emptiness or anxiety that we carry. And I think there was no other choice but for social media to kind of fill that void, to kind of be a bit of like junk food, to kind of give our brains something to place ourselves in socially, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Yeah. And so I think there is a way that we end up feeling like we don't quite know who we are or what our purpose is, where we're supposed to be, who our friends are. We might find ourselves kind of almost like looking for social cues, whether it's through text messages and, you know, or on social media, to try to see like, how is everyone doing? And I think we're trying to locate ourselves in a certain community. I think that's why people join different clubs and go to different retreats and conferences, is because we're trying to kind of find some kind of way that we can plug in again and feel connected and known. I think that's a lot of the reason why people come to church still, is because it feels good. Even if, you know, let's say God wasn't a part of it, even the feeling of coming into church and knowing that you're bumping into the same people every week and they can say hi to you, they know your name, is like a comforting feeling. It kind of organizes us. But I think that's a lot of, honestly, why culturally we are more anxious, is because we have so few rituals that really connect us to a larger group of people. Like, I think the closest thing I could probably point to for LA is like a Dodger game, where everyone goes and there's this feeling that you have when you're there of like, I am LA, you know, like we're here, we're connected. And it's a reassuring feeling, because that's kind of part of our biology throughout human history, is that we feel connected and safe when we have moments like that.
Right. No, that's really interesting, because I've thought a lot about, you know, you can go back as far as you want, but, you know, when these towns up here used to be smaller communities, right? There was like a plumber. There was the plumber, and that man knew he was the plumber and had value as the plumber, and everyone called him now the local plumber has to have good Yelp reviews, because that's where people are going to go. And there might be a plumber down in a different city that will drive up here who has better Yelp reviews. And you kind of, when you don't have value in a smaller system, then you lose your value in the bigger system. You know, when I make the Montrose Church Kids musical, I am the best writer in Montrose of the kids musical, right? I am the guy. And if I let my value just be defined in that small space, I would feel fulfilled. I would feel my purpose. My purpose was to create something good for these 500 people, and I did that, and I feel great about it. But then I go on social media to a much broader sense, and all of a sudden, then I'm comparing my work to Lin-Manuel Miranda and Tim
Right.
Minchin,
Now
which
you're
I
an
don't
object.
stack up at all.
Yeah.
And if I put something on there, it'll get 20 likes when they get millions of likes.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't feel valued. Of course, I feel anxious. Of course, I don't feel like I have purpose.
It's something so different than seeing those kids come up to you and having their smiles on their face and just being totally ecstatic that they got to
Totally
be a part in a play.
Yeah.
And you just know, like, I did it.
I wish
Yeah.
that fulfilled me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
I wish that fulfilled me.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to get to that place.
Yeah.
You know
Because
what I
then
mean?
there's this other feeling that you kind of drop into when you open the social media app. Now you're kind of falling into a void, right?
Yeah.
Where you recognize that you're just one of thousands or millions of people.
Yeah.
And we feel ourselves kind of trying to grab onto some kind of identity by how many likes that we get or how much feedback we get on a certain post. And it's just this endless, unfulfilling loop. But I think it comes out of a good place of us trying to reassure ourselves that we are valuable, that we have a purpose, that we have identity. But it just doesn't give us the feedback that is rich enough to fill that need. You know, we need to see somebody's face. We need to know that they know us, you know. I think therapists can feel that a lot too. It's so ironic to me that therapists are mainly trying to help people feel connected and have good, solid relationships. And yet it's a person who is, you know, living most of their week, you know, isolated in an office, seeing people one-on-one
Sure.
all day.
Yeah.
And so I think there is something where that's something that I've tried to create for myself is how do I connect with other people in my profession so I really do feel like I'm sharing my life with other people rather than I'm just pouring out client by client.
Yeah. I want to make sure that we get into some faith, religion stuff, because that's the whole reason why I started this podcast was to try to get different perspectives of what people think and what they're thinking and what they grew up with. And I'm just going to leave it like kind of open-ended. Where are you with all that right now? What has that journey kind of been for you? And we can take it anywhere we want.
Yeah, sure. Well, you know, I mean, I grew up in the Presbyterian church, and I think a lot of my worldview there was defined by the kind of evangelical church. You know, we were talking just a second ago about this feeling of kind of this countercultural kind of sense of, you know, either you listen to secular music or you listen to Christian music, you know, which is so silly to me now. But this feeling of that, you know, there's something that you need to leave behind in the world so that you can be pure and just for God. And I feel like there's something in me that I mean, obviously built my sense of who God is around that God is like a physical being that exists in another realm that I can communicate to through a long wired telephone, you know, to him by prayer if I try really hard. I remember as a kid feeling like, you know, like the lamp over our dining room was like literally like a lightning rod that would take our prayers up to God, you know. And I think that's in some way kind of been a little bit of a throughout my, you know, growing up years has been a little bit of like my first language still about Christianity. And I have to keep catching myself because whenever I literally start to picture it, it doesn't fit for me anymore of thinking about God as a singular literal being somewhere, you know, in a different kind of, you know, plane in heaven. And I've really gravitated toward this idea of God being something that is intimately connected with the very breaths that we take and the world that we live in. A bit more of our all-encompassing reality that somehow generates who I am. You know, there's been a couple authors that I've read that speak to. Oh, who is it? He wrote. Shoot.
We'll edit it in later.
Yeah,
we'll
sure.
remember later. We'll just throw it in there.
Oh, I forget his name, but he talks. Surprised by Hope is the book. I'm forgetting the author's name, but I'm sure you would know him if I said it. Do you have that book? Oh, you have it. It's right on your bookcase there. N.T. Wright. That's it. I got it the first try, right?
Literally have it right here, and it is crisp and fresh because I have not opened it yet.
It's wonderful. And he has a couple different books that all speak around the same idea of that the idea of what God is doing in the world is that he is bringing heaven to earth through us. Yeah. That what it means that we are the hands and feet of God isn't that we have somehow ascended away from the earth to join God in heaven in some spiritual way, but that we get to kind of be these touch points. And I picture it almost like two fabrics that are stitched together in my person. And so what does that mean for my life? I think it means that I don't have to turn away from certain things in the world. I can recognize God's presence in them, and I can be curious about the world. Richard Mao, the old president of Fuller, I remember him saying something like this, where he said, if God really has conquered the world, then we don't have to be afraid of the things of the world. We can step into them. And so I think there's a way to kind of look at, okay, what are the things in my life that I feel most enlivened by and attracted to? And how can I see that as something that God is growing in me or calling me toward? It's something that I have to keep reminding myself of, though, because there's a part of me that keeps associating Christianity with some of those other ways of viewing it that don't quite fit for me.
Yeah, no, totally.
And so I have to keep reminding myself, like, God can be bigger than that, and likely is. And I have to keep almost like being aware of this kind of first language of faith that doesn't feel like it fits me anymore. So I can kind of step into something that feels more meaningful or connected to me about who God is.
No, totally. And it's interesting. I don't know if you've experienced this, but like there are certain things that happen that put me in check on kind of the things I used to think. And one of the hugest ones was, okay, like in my mind, in reading, I've kind of deconstructed what prayer is and what I believe and what I don't believe. And now all of a sudden I have this kid and every night before bed, we want to say a prayer. Yeah. Well, what am I going to say?
Yeah.
What, like, okay, really I have these thoughts and I have these beliefs now, but what am I going to tell my 4-year-old who's now 8? But that's when I started thinking about it. Am I going to say, heal this person? Is that what I believe? Am I going to say, bless this, bless this, bless this? How am I going to I actually have to do something now.
Yeah. Cause you need it. They need a response. Yeah. You can't just be like, I don't know. I mean, I guess you can just say, I don't know. Right. But like at the same time, I feel that kind of pressure too of thinking, wait a second, they might need to know God that way right now. Right. They might need to know God is with me, and the only way that they can think about that is God literally heal this person, right, or literally protect us. And at the same time, I go, oh, but is that like entrenching them in a more limited way of viewing God, which is so silly because they're 8 or 6 or whatever. Yeah.
But I think it does matter because it mattered for me, and I had to think about it and kind of deconstruct it later and realize I don't believe it. But is that even possible to do with an 8-year-old? I don't know. Yeah. That's really, I think about it all the time.
I don't know. I think that's something I wrestle with too.
Like, is it important for her to learn Old Testament stories so later she can learn what they actually mean and why they're in there?
Because I tell different stories in the Bible.
I just looked at all the Old Testament stories as these were heroes, and so I need to go be the hero. I need to be the one leading the youth group, and I need I need to be the Moses, and that's not the purpose of those stories at all. Yeah. So how am I?
We've tried to do that with our kids, where we go, the reason they wrote the creation story of Genesis is because they were trying to describe who God was. It might not have been a literal thing, and our kids are like, okay. Yeah. They don't care.
I'm like, so Cadence, Noah's Ark.
Have you thought literally about what it would be like for him to build
Totally. No, but I think about that stuff all the time. And then touching on what you were talking about also, just that discovering kind of a wider presence of God. I've talked about it so much on this podcast because I lean towards having Broadway guests.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Because that's what I love. But really, like, Broadway is what did that to me. Like,
Wow,
seeing these stories and going, an atheist wrote this, and a Jewish guy wrote this, and why am I connecting to this so spiritually?
Why am I crying right
like,
now?
To me, it literally became, this is either evidence that there is a God working through all things, or it's evidence that there's no God, and this is just a shared human experience.
Yeah.
And
like threatening somehow, like
literally, I teeter. I just teeter on that fence. Like, and I don't think, I was talking to Dave about this, about that idea is, I don't think either side is going to present me the perfect argument to decide. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I have so much God in my brain because that's how I was raised, but it's really hard for me to escape, like, the simplicity of, I didn't exist before I was born, I'm not going to exist after I die. Like, that's so clean cut and simple. And the idea of God is so massive and infinite that my brain, like, wants to just choose the simple sometimes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think I think that's a really good point about the way that you recognize some kind of truth or beauty in something that you love, and then having to go, oh wait, you either have to say, oh, the author is like secretly Christian and they're giving some kind of message, which is kind of, again, the thing that I grew up with there, where it's like, oh, I wonder if Bono is a Christian, sure. Or you just go, there's some kind of truth that we tap into together, because how can we not, if God is in all things and he's a generous, kind, caring God, then there's a way that, as thinking creatures who have some kind of impression of self-reflection and stuff, that we're going to bump into these kind of beautiful truths. And how do we make sense of that? Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the problems with Christianity, I wanted to say modern day, but probably, like, in a sense always, is, so I found so much beauty in Tim Minchin's work, and he's a well-known atheist. And when I talk to him and we have, like, a shared connection with something that he has made, like, on what I feel is like a deep spiritual level.
Yeah.
I look at it and go, see, that's the presence of God everywhere. He looks at it and goes, that's evidence that there is no God. That, it wasn't your religion shaping me. It was the fact that this human experience, right?
Right.
Like, we look at but we're both, like, looking at something and agreeing that it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Like, why can't we just, like, do that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, that's happening in the culture. And instead of, like, just embracing the beautiful thing, we're like, build the wall between them. Like, we have to be separate from them. And I think, if anything, from when I was a kid until now, that's what I'm trying to do with this podcast, is see the whole elephant. And look at something and just go, I know that we might not agree on what it is, but let's just agree that it's beautiful.
And there's something here. There's something here worth exploring. Yeah. I think there's a guy, Zach Bush, who talks a lot about, of all things, like the microbiome, and the idea that we are, kind of like we're more close to a rainforest, where we contain lots of different species of things all living inside of us at the same time. We are not one organism. We are the emergent function of lots of different organisms working in concert together. That idea is fascinating to me, but I think it speaks to this idea that we are kind of seated at this kind of pinnacle of self-reflection over creation, where we are this part of the world that is able to reflect and make sense of our experience.
Right.
And what a beautiful thing that, it's hard to escape that being a spiritual feeling, of oneness. Right. And the idea that you guys can both reflect on this from different perspectives together feels in some way, I don't know what to call it, but like divine or spiritual, or just this kind of feeling of elevation that you're able to kind of connect about something beautiful.
Yeah. And I'm going to throw it back to our childhood, our especially like junior high and high school days. like the catchphrase was, you can have a personal relationship with God.
Huh.
And like, I look at it now and like, I get the point. Like they were wanting it to be, something that you thought about. You don't just come and be part of a group, but also then like we were taught that I am the hero of this story, connecting directly to God.
Yeah.
And we miss out on the beauty of all around us.
Yeah. We're looking up.
It's not an individual.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, but it's also everything.
Yeah. I get the same sense. Like I have a feeling of God not caring so much about making sure that we are always, looking to him or keeping our gaze directly on him.
Yeah.
But I mean, even with Moses, he kind of talks about how like, if you look at me, you're going to die, like, but this idea of, us being stewards of something, and not just of creation, but of our bodies, of life itself, of each other, of like, we are here to, live in some way that we honor that responsibility.
And I would say I find that most of the time when Jesus references heaven, eternity, he's talking about now. Yeah. He's talking about the kingdom of heaven, not as a reward for later, but now.
A certain way of being in now.
And that connectedness, all that stuff to me is what that is that he's talking about.
Yeah. I like that too.
It's good stuff, man.
Good stuff.
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah. So next time we're going to talk about your high school acoustic albums.
We'll play a few.
Do some commentary views about your heartthrob songs.
I've always thought I never want to be famous because those things will
resurface.
There's going to be like, we're raising a whole. Even now, when someone's famous and they do like a look back on their life, the photos look all blurry and like if our kids get famous, high def. Yeah. I mean, they're going to have so many photos and so many videos and like in the future, producers are going to be like, we have too much content of this person's early life. It's going to be nuts.
That's true.
I don't know if like you want to, draw people to your practice or practice in general. Sure. I don't know if therapists actually do that.
We have the best therapists in LA.
Perfect.
So Here Counseling.
Tell us about it.
Here Counseling is our practice. We have an office in Pasadena and in downtown Los Angeles, but also telehealth, video therapy. It's really hard to find a therapist right now. Sometimes if you have insurance, you have to wait like 3-6 months, something like that. But we've got some great people that can help you. And so you can go to herecounseling.com, and we have a care coordinator. So like, if you don't want to talk directly to a therapist, you can talk to her about what you're looking for without feeling any kind of pressure, and she'll try her best to get you connected with someone who's available.
Awesome. Thanks so much for doing this, man. That was fun.
Yeah, good time. Thanks, Eric.